Are we live? So this is my first live stream, first of many, hopefully. New to this, so I'm going to be easing in today. I'm going to be talking about the recent Trump rally in Madison Square Garden and the controversy surrounding that. I'm going to watch Konstantin Kisin's video. He was at the rally, talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to end on the question of, is Trump a fascist? Look at the evidence and talk a little bit about how conservatives can't do comedy. So let's get straight into a controversial clip of a comedian at the Madison Square Trump rally, and we'll go from there to give a bit of context to what's going on. Let's get straight into it. So,
you know, there's a lot going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico. Okay. All right. Okay. We're getting there. It's absolutely wild to see. And in Texas, stuff is really, really crazy. We're right there by a wide open border. Where are my proud Latinos at tonight? You guys see what I mean? It's wide open. There's so many of them. It's absolutely incredible. Believe it or not, people, I welcome migrants to the United States of America with open arms. And by open arms, I mean like this. It's wild. And these Latinos, they love making babies too. Just know that. They do. They do. There's no pulling out. They don't do that. They come inside, just like they did to our country. Republicans are the party with a good sense of humor.
okay, so, I mean, I don't find that funny personally. I think, where's the setup to the stuff with Puerto Rico? It's just racism. That's why I think we'll get into it in a bit, but I just don't think conservatives can do comedy. There's a reason why most of the celebrated comedians are left-wing, and it is a left-wing medium for a reason. But we'll get into that in a bit. I want to go straight to a video from Konstantin Kisin from Trigonometry, and he was at the Madison Square rally, and let's hear his thoughts on what happened and if it was a Nazi rally.
You've likely read reports from the mainstream media about the Nazi rally President Trump held at New York's iconic Madison Square Garden last night. Many of these articles appear to have been written by journalists who wisely avoided the menacing event and reported on it from the safety of their basements. I'm not a real journalist, however, so having read that literally Hitler was gathering some sort of America's worst reprobates in the heart of New York for a rally of hate, I did something very old-fashioned. I went to see it with my own eyes. And what I witnessed at the event was truly shocking. By the time I arrived at midday, people had been standing in line since the early morning. The diversity of Nazis on display was unbelievable. Black Nazis, Latino Nazis, Asian Nazis, white Nazis, female Nazis, and lots of Jewish Nazis were all assembled in an orderly line, chatting politely to each other and cracking jokes. It was terrifying.
Okay, so the idea that if you're polite, if you're of colour, if you're a woman, a Jew, gay, you can't be a Nazi. Whereas we know, clearly, not only white people are Nazis. Jesse Lee Peterson, one of the most prominent black conservatives, he's a white nationalist. The former leader of the Proud Boys, a neo-fascist Enrique Tarrio, who was literally sent to jail for storming the White House on January the 6th. He is of Afro-Cuban descent. So the idea that only white people can be white nationalists or fascists or Nazis, is simply not true. And it is almost a racist thing to say in itself, like, oh no, look, we're not racist. It's that classic, we're not racist. We look, we've got black friends, supporters. Okay. So you're saying black people can't be racist? That is strange to me. I've never understood that myself, but let's continue.
Across the road, kept at bay by the few police who sadly haven't been defunded yet, was a handful of mostly peaceful protesters. They were there to save democracy by demanding that the democratically elected leader of one of America's two major parties be thrown in prison. In contrast with the fascists I found myself among, whose amicable and respectful demeanor was truly outrageous, the peaceful anti-hate protesters were angry and confrontational, screaming in the faces of those of us standing in line. Enjoy!
Okay, so they're the real fascists now because they're screaming at Nazis. This is the upside down world that we live in where literally you can't shout against the horrors and the ideology of fascism. You're the real fascist. You hear this all the time, constantly. It's like, oh no, you can't shout. Why not? Like what Trump represents is pure fascism. Like the way he speaks about immigrants, criminals, filth coming over our border from criminal insane asylums. It's exactly the same language. So he's got no argument. So he just has to say, oh, they were the angry ones. Yeah, they have a right to be angry when there's a potential fascist in the White House again.
Your Nazi rally! One furious man courageously shouted at a family with young children. Despite these attacks...
Oh, using young children as a shield. Oh, we can't be a fascist. We're protecting the children. Oh, look, they're being... There's no evidence of this. He's just saying stuff now. He's just has to project the fact that he's got no arguments against it. He's just, look, we're for children. Oh, yeah, okay.
To save democracy from the voters, after several hours of queuing, we eventually made it inside where the horror show truly began. Reminiscent of Adolf Hitler's rallies, the event opened with a stand-up comedian telling a few jokes. Straight out of the Nazi playbook, that was. The hateful comic made fun of everyone. Celebrities, Israelis, Palestinians, even Puerto Ricans. It made me want to reach for a comfort animal, but the closest person to me was a woman in a hijab, and I didn't want to commit a hate crime by hugging her without consent.
So he's joking about consent, like it's a bad thing. Oh no, oh, these lefties who love consent and their permission. And also as well, it's interesting he doesn't show the clips of what was said because there is no defense. They weren't jokes. It was just hate. It was just hate. Oh, racist stereotypes about black people carving watermelons. A non-joke about Puerto Rican and Puerto Rico. But interesting he doesn't show the clips because, again, it's not funny. It's just hate. There's no irony there. There's no wordplay. There's no setup. There's no actual meaning and shared experience. It's just, oh, look, I don't like brown people. I don't like immigrants. I don't like Latino people. It's not funny. That's not what comedy is.
By the time I came to my senses, a radio personality called Sid Rosenberg was on stage. Rosenberg, I thought to myself, typical Nazi name. He had apparently just returned from Israel, which he claimed both he and President Trump support. I couldn't help noticing that every time
Israel, a fascist government, literally a far-right government, Netanyahu is a fascist. So the idea that, oh, they can't be fascists. Okay, so Netanyahu is clearly a fascist. He's committing mass murder in Palestine. But no. He's, not a fascist.
he mentioned Israel, the Nazi scum, who had by this point filled the stadium to the rafters, cheered and clapped. This is just like one of Hitler's rallies, I said to a man next to me who was wearing some sort of skull cap. He laughed as if I'd said something funny and resumed cheering, holding up his...
I very much doubt that happened. I very much doubt he made somebody laugh. I just don't believe that. I think he's lying. He's got to be lying here because he's not funny.
bigoted Jews for Trump sign. A succession of other prominent speakers followed, all of whom made terrible...
Another racist. Hulk Hogan, who famously said the N word. I mean, come on. Oh, what defense is it? It's actually because he can't defend it, so he has to make these kind of obfuscations and oh look these people, but actually show what people said. Ah no we won't show what actually people said. Well, he'll narrativize it in terms of oh look there's diversity. That means they're not fascist. Okay.
offensive comments like, "We love America. America's the greatest country in the world." And ask yourself, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?
Trump didn't do well with the economy. People don't realize that. Actually, GDP went down. Like his track record on the economy wasn't great. So the idea that somehow he's the answer to the economy where he like doubled the debt, national debt, he wasn't good.
This obviously made me extremely uncomfortable. Everyone knows America is better off now than it was under Trump because thanks to DEI, the country finally
Okay, so a racist dog whistle. Kamala, no, she's not here on meritocracy. Well, is Trump? He, a man who was given 400 million by his dad and has been bankrupt at least 6, 7 times. He's here on meritocracy. Okay.
has a black female vice president. But horrifyingly, the people around me seemed to think that being unable to afford groceries mattered more. I could barely contain my disgust. This was all getting very scary, so I went to hide in a toilet cubicle for several minutes to regain my strength. As expected, the venue didn't have any gender-fluid restrooms, so I had to sit in the men's room listening to Nazi.
Ah, a funny joke about gender. There's nothing here. It's just, oh, gender fluid. What's wrong with people having spaces so they can urinate in peace? I mean, what point does he think he's making here? Again, it's the narrativization. He can't look at the facts. He can't show us the footage of what Tucker Carlson was saying, what Donald Trump was saying, what this comedian was saying. He just has to spin it in a way that's like, oh no, we're not Nazis. Okay.
After Nazi wash their hands and make hateful small talk. "Isn't this fun?" I heard one of them say. "Not if you're a person of color," I wanted to screech from the safety of my stall. By the time I eventually returned to my seat, a black man was on stage talking about the need to overcome America's complicated history of racism and sexism to move forward together. What about transphobia?
Yeah, I remember actually seeing this bit, but then he moved off from that. He said he actually did say that and then not actually address it and say, but that's not why I'm here. I'm not here to talk about black history of oppression, redlining, Jim Crow. I'm not. So he's being disingenuous and lying here. That's the one thing he has to grasp on to. Like, oh, they might have talked about like the past treatment of black people. No, he didn't even talk about it. He said, I'm not here to talk about that today, and completely just talked about Donald Trump. So just lies.
I screamed at the top of my lungs. But instead of stopping and checking their privileges, the Nazis kept on rallying. After venting about illegals for what seemed like hours, they eventually wheeled out illegal-in-chief Elon Musk. How stupid are these people? I couldn't help thinking. Can they not see that a student who drops out of college to start a business and a gang member who crosses the southern border to murder Americans are basically the same?
So he's just saying that you're either that or that. Immigrants are either murderers who come over and, infiltrate the border with their crime and the guns, or you're a billionaire neo-Nazi. It's just pure mischaracterization of the reality of immigration and the diversity. And America is actually built on immigration, more so than any other country. So, but it's okay for Elon Musk. It's okay for Elon Musk to go there. But other people, and I wonder why Elon Musk is allowed and maybe not Mexicans. I wonder why that is.
But Nazis are going to Nazi, so they went crazy for Musk, the man who ended democracy by allowing people to express their opinions online without censorship.
Well, that's not true, is it? He literally censors the word cis on Twitter and bans any reference often to the also the restrictions against transphobia. He kind of cut them out. So he is very much very selective with his freedom of speech. And also Twitter's just got worse. It is just full of Nazis now and has just been hemorrhaging money and advertisers. So the idea that now it's this beacon of freedom of speech where it hasn't got the moderation, it hasn't got the accountability and oversight that it once had. It's a cesspool.
By the time Trump came on stage, it was nearly 8 p.m. and I was too angry to concentrate on what he was saying. It was deeply hateful, of course, and he was incredibly orange. I stumbled out of the venue in a daze. It was dark, and as we all know, democracy dies in darkness. As you know, I've been concerned about both the economic and political direction of travel of Western countries in recent years. That being the case, I'm keen to protect
The
my
grift
family in
of
case things
gold
continue to get worse.
ownership.
That's why
Wow,
I'm making
okay,
sure to
so
keep
he's
a
not
portion
far
of my
right.
savings in gold.
He's
The
not.
reason the price of
He's not a fascist. He's not far right. Even though gold acquisition of the last decade, at least, has been associated with the far right, the AfD in Germany, Viktor Orban, Donald Trump, all the right wing grifters selling gold. The lack of self awareness is somewhat astonishing. So, what's going on here? I just don't think conservatives can do comedy. Like his attempt at jokes here about consent and gender fluid. What's wrong with consent? The idea that people should be able to consent to having sexual relations with partners. Is he against it? Is that a joke? Is that funny? I really genuinely think that people on the right struggle with comedy because comedy is a universal effect. I think it really does make everybody on the same level playing field. So, for example, when someone slips on an ice on the ground, it's you see the vulnerability of humans, and you see that we build civilizations, can do so much, but even a little bit of ice on the street can be our downfall. It can literally kill us, and that could be the end of an individual. And it's funny. Physical humor is funny. People's being, slipping on a banana skin is universally funny because it's that vulnerability and it's a story. You see someone walk in and then all of a sudden they're on the floor. And fascists don't get that because for fascists, like Hitler didn't want to be seen playing football or sports where he wasn't in control and he couldn't control the optics of it. So if he was to lose the game or lose the pass, optically, that makes him seem weak. And fascists do not like being seen as weak. The idea of being mocked is literally the worst thing for a fascist. And that's why Donald Trump actually became president, because Barack Obama at one of the White House dinners mocked Donald Trump. And then a few years later, he's a very vengeful man. He wanted to become president. And that's the man he is. They hate being mocked. And that's why the weird thing worked at the beginning of Kamala Harris's campaign. And it's really strong because that was guided by her, not the DNC. It was recognizing these guys are weird. Donald Trump is not a normal person. He doesn't care about people. He's obsessed with transness, immigrants, degeneracy. He doesn't really care about the everyday concerns of the American people. And you just got to call them weird because their obsessions with transgenitalia and bathrooms and the whole trans thing is just weird. It's a weird sexual obsession with the right. And yeah, mocking them is the best way to undermine them because they can't laugh at themselves. They take themselves so seriously and they are humorless. It's funny that the comedian said that, it's the Republicans that are the funny people. And I think Donald Trump is actually funny, but not unintentionally. I think he just comes out with the most absurd thing. the most crazy. He's unpredictable, and that's why he's funny, because you never know what he's going to say next. He is fascinating to watch. He's charismatic. He's compelling, but what he says often is very meaningless, very empty. He doesn't have any policy ideas. He spoke about having concepts of a plan for policy. No policies. All he ever talks about is immigration, the border, the immigration, the border. He has no ideas about infrastructure, policy, tax, apart from cutting tax for the wealthy. And this is why conservatives aren't comedians on average. Like, even people try to appropriate Bill Hicks, George Carlin. Today, if they were around today, they would clearly be left wing. And they have ruined comedy in many ways, because comedy is about empathy, understanding, knowing that we're all the same. When you watch a good comedian, no matter who they are, they'll have a story and you'll relate to it. It'll be a very specific story, very human, and they'll probably be telling a story about how they did something really stupid and really inappropriate, and something that we've all done. And you relate to that because you go, oh yeah, we've all been idiots. We're all fools. That's comedy. Everyone's a fool. Everyone's an idiot. Everyone's susceptible to biases, and they do stupid things. And that's what makes us human. And that's what unites us. But they can't accept that. They can't accept the fact that everybody is prone to doing bad things. We all make mistakes. They're like, oh no, you're a bad person if you make a mistake. Like, there's good people and there's bad people. We're the good guys, and then it's the leftists who are the bad guys who, are transing their kids. So I really believe that there's a reason why most left-wing people are comedians. Most comedians are left-wing. There are very few right-wing comedians, like Jim Davidson, just a hateful man. Not funny, just racist. Bernard Manning, you could argue he had more craft, but it was just hate. Like, that's all there was behind it. Yeah, he was quick, and, he had probably thousands of jokes, but they were just based on hate. There wasn't about a kind of understanding of humanity and sharing of what we are as a human and our experience. Because, again, fascism is against art, and comedy is art. It really is it combines so many different things: storytelling, poetry, language, irony, literature. Comedy is very sophisticated, but just being hateful, stereotypes. I mean, that's what happened to Al Murray. Al Murray, his pub landlord character, he is obviously an ironic character. It's playing on the Middle England stereotype of, a bit xenophobic, a bit racist. But he realized that actually his audience just weren't laughing at the character and the irony and, like, oh, look, they were laughing with it and they just agreed with it. And it's the same with Dave Chappelle. When he was doing the Chappelle show, he quit because the people who were laughing at his jokes they were kind of laughing at him, not with him. And he kind of stepped back and went, actually, no, this isn't what I set out to do. And ironically, since then, although he is a great comedian, he has become transphobic because he almost sees it that you can't talk about trans rights and black rights. It's almost overshadowed black rights in a way. But no, we can talk about both. There's a intersectional connection between the two, and we should be able to talk about both. It's not one or the other. And it's a shame that he's fallen down that path, because trans people, they're not harming him and his shtick and his career. He's probably one of the most respected comedians ever to be alive. So I generally think that, again, comedy is about empathy, understanding someone, like understanding you're flawed, like stories about a character who's flawed and they go on a journey of change, they make mistakes, but in the end, they make the right decision. And comedy often is about that. It's about knowing we're all flawed, we do the wrong things, we say the worst things, we make mistakes, but if we act better, we can make better decisions. But the conservatives don't want that. They just want the world the way it was, so you can be like, oh no, you can't offend anyone anymore. Okay, so why is it a good thing to offend people? I mean, you can offend people in a positive way. You can do it, you can push people's boundaries, but if you've got a point and there's actually something behind it, not just hate, actually an understanding about how people work and how people are, because that's what all should be about truth. It should be an element of, you know, something we share. Like we recognize that as true. Like when someone does, like Peter Kay is classic. Like there's so many elements of Peter Kay, what working class life, where he just nails it. That you recognize that. Oh, everybody who grew up in a working class environment, even maybe middle class as well, recognize the observations. And comedy is about observations. And that's why it's good to point out prejudice and go, look, people are prejudiced. We all have our blind spots. We all do stupid stuff. And the ability to laugh at ourselves and go, yeah, we're all idiots. But now people just say, "Oh, you're being woke. You can't do comedy anymore. It's too woke. Everyone's getting upset." But it's the right wing that get the most upset about everything. That's all they're angry constantly. The Daily Mail, Fox News, they're triggered by everything. They're triggered by anything. They're triggered by just like gay people existing or trans people existing. But again, it's all about projection. So let's move on to, is Donald Trump a fascist? And there's a nice little video here that breaks down the rhetoric and just how obvious it is. If you're in denial, you're not going to see it. If you don't, haha, oh God. I've got a regular in the comments. I'm not going to respond to that. Okay, so let's get straight into the video and break down why Donald Trump is obviously a fascist.
The racist, sexist, and vulgar remarks at Donald Trump's Madison Square Garden rally from the former president himself and his slate of speakers has drawn significant criticism the day after. For more on the rhetoric and its impact, we're joined by Ruth Ben-Ghiat, a professor of history at New York University. Ruth, welcome back to the NewsHour.
Thank you.
So we are just days from Election Day. This was probably one of the ugliest collection of remarks from selected speakers that we've seen at a Trump rally. You study this kind of rhetoric. So what stood out to you about this type of language this close to Election Day?
So, this took place in Madison Square Garden, and it was one of many occasions that the Trump campaign has chosen to allow comparisons to be made to the Nazis. So that was Madison Square Garden, which was the site of a rally by American Nazis in 1939, talking about polluting the blood, speaking of Americans as an enemy within. This is all straight from fascism.
Yeah, people don't talk about this. This happened in February 1939, and the eugenics movement that was deeply inspired the Nazis, came from America. And there was support up until the war, the invasion of Poland later that year, for the Nazi Party in the UK, America, across the world. And to think that 1939 in February, this rally was going on, George Washington in the background there, and you see the mirroring of it today. The language is very reminiscent, and she does go into detail here.
In fact, fascism, the core of fascism in Italy and Germany were combatants who followed their leader to bring the war home and turned their force against their own people. And when Donald Trump was talking about America as an occupied country and he was going to liberate it, and also, in the past, talking about using the military on Americans, this comes out of fascism and also the tradition of.
Yeah, he actually said that we're going to deal with the enemy within. And he was talking about leftists, these radical leftists. And he said he evoked the military. This is pure fascistic language. There's no ambiguity here. It's pure fascism. And there's no argument.
military dictatorships like Pinochet in Chile. So it's a purely authoritarian spectacle that we saw.
I want to underscore that parallel you're drawing there because this is what many are talking about today, both the remarks from Trump about America being an occupied country, but also last night we heard from Trump loyalist Stephen Miller, who said America is for Americans and Americans only. That, of course, was also another parallel drawn to that 1939 Nazi rally at the old Madison Square Garden, which back...
Again, it's blood and soil rhetoric. The idea that this peaceful land is for this native population. The idea that that's the only people. Why? Why? It's not rational. Anybody should be able to live where they want. We've got one planet. Why should certain areas be exclusively for certain ethnicities and races? This is fascism because you're telling people it's basically a call for an ethno state. Let's be clear. The idea that people of certain races should live in certain areas. Here for white people, here for black people. And it never ends well. These societies aren't stable. They don't create discord because any ethnicity, there's going to be tensions. Even within white, quite homogeneous societies, there's going to be tensions. So, again, ethnicity can be split up infinitely. You can always going to have tensions. There's always going to be, when you're looking for purity in a population, there's always going to be somebody who's not pure enough. They're not going to meet that. So if we, even in the UK or America, you did get rid of immigration, let's say, hypothetically, you get rid of immigration. There's still going to be an enemy. There has to be an enemy. Fascism thrives on a constant war, it's a victim complex where there's a constant outside agitation or within. So you need an enemy. So they'd isolate someone who is white and they're kind of going on them. So there's always going to be an enemy. There's going to be somebody. It'd be trans people. They just focus more on trans people. Got rid of immigrants. It'd be trans people. So it's that constant war, constant fight against us versus them.
Then promised to, quote, restore America to the true Americans. Ruth, we have to point out again, this is closing arguments time for the candidates. So why do you think this kind of rhetoric resonates with millions of people right now?
I think Trump has been conditioning Americans since 2015 to see violence as something justified in certain cases and even patriotic. He's been conditioning them to see other Americans as enemies, as diseased, as...
Yeah, when you see the rhetoric back from 2016, it does seem tame in comparison. And even Hitler knew this, even when he got it through democratically. He still, when he changed the laws and he basically took power, he still tried to maintain that illusion of democracy because you have to maintain it. Like, a lot of what they did was kind of, although people knew, they tried to hide it as well. So you have to have that veneer of respectability. And now they're getting to the point where the rhetoric is outright. It was, in the UK is different, it's more dog whistles, but it's, Donald Trump is being pretty mask off in his fascism.
Dirty. And what we have to remember is that, you know, authoritarians might initially target one group, and he's been talking mostly about immigrants, but he's also calling the enemy within the political opposition. And when the Nazis built Dachau in 1933, because they were running out of space in prisons, they built this camp Dachau. And they didn't put Jews in it at first. It was for the political opposition, liberals, leftists. Then it had Jehovah's Witnesses. Then
Yeah, so this is something, again, people always say, oh, the left are the real fascists. And then you look at and say, oh, they were National Socialists. No, they were not National Socialists. First of all, like she's saying here, Dachau, the first people to go were the communists, the socialists, the intellectuals, the trade unionists. They were the first ones to go. So this illusion that, oh, you know, left are just two sides of the same coin. I've heard that being said, that leftists are just like fascists. No. I mean, I would argue, and this is a different video, Stalinism. Stalin was a fascist. A lot of communism kind of fell into fascism. But the idea that National socialism was actually socialism is just so blatantly not true.
LGBTQ people, all kinds of other people went in there, and then Jews, were targeted as well by the regime. So when they're talking about deporting so many people in America, this is a massive amount of people, and thus you need an infrastructure of repression. You need camps, and the whole thing is a dystopia. And this is not what America is. But Donald Trump has been conditioning Americans to think that this is the way.
We've seen.
And it's the same in Germany. When Hitler got into power 33, he bided his time. It's a process. You don't just go in. Fascism is a very incremental process of dehumanization, propaganda at that point. Radio, television, film became very important for the Nazi regime to repeat their message, to constantly bombard. And that's what we see today on the far right. They constantly have to be fed these stories about transes, immigrants, people who are undermining the fabric, spreading degeneracy. The left, the socialists, the communists are undermining the family values, the nation. It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same rhetoric. It's updated to 21st century, 2024, but the relationship is unambiguous.
And obviously, these remarks strongly condemned by Vice President Harris and Democrats. But among Republicans, the response has sort of been a mixed bag. There's been some, like Senator Rick Scott, who's in a tight re-election race in Florida, who said in response to the comedian's racist remarks there about Puerto Ricans, quote, "This joke bombed for a reason." And then we saw Florida Congressman Byron Donalds, who also spoke at the rally, who said this on CNBC this morning.
This is the problem with most media today. They're too busy trying to fearmonger everything it's instead of actually talking about the facts and the substance.
So, Ruth, members of the Republican Party now also criticize Vice President Harris for calling former President Trump a fascist, saying that is the dangerous rhetoric. Are those kind of remarks on the same level to you?
Not at all. And this is part of an authoritarian projection mechanism. I call it the upside down world of authoritarianism, where ever since Mussolini, he was the first to call Democrats the real tyrants, and fascism was going to be freedom. Fascism was going to make Italy great again. That was the slogan, as was drain.
Oh, God, boy, can I talk about this. Psychological projection. This is so much of right-wing thinking. Every accusation is an admission of guilt, and they constantly project their feelings, their prejudices onto the left. So they're the ones undermining freedom of speech when Elon Musk is undermining freedom of speech. They're the ones who are, doing bad things to our children, and then they're kind of dismissing the healthcare for trans children and children broadly. They don't want to fund it in America. The Republicans don't want to fund anything to actually help people. They're so obstructionist in their policies. So it's constantly, and it comes from a feeling of anxiety, internal uncomfort. Because again, conservatives and people further on the right, they're not told to introspect and think about why they feel something. So a lot of homophobia comes from that. They'll project it outwards. And the same with transphobia either. It's a repression or a disgust response. And everything I hear, they don't have arguments. It's never evidence-based arguments. Here's an argument. This is why this should happen. Look at the data. It's all, well, trans people are criminals. And that means people shouldn't be able to transition. It's like, okay, so there's no criminals, no heterosexuals aren't criminal. So shall we ban heterosexuality by that logic? So anybody who's heterosexual and a criminal, they've got to go. They've got to go. It's not an argument because they don't have the argument. So it's psychological projection. Everything they say, it's either perceived hypocrisy or psychological projection.
swamp. Trump took that from Mussolini as well. So this is pure projection to, and it's all the end game is to justify, to justify whatever they would like to do for retribution, locking up the political opposition by saying that they're the ones who are the tyrants, they're the ones who are repressive.
Yeah, that's all you ever hear. It's like when you talk about the fascist mirroring and relationship between the rhetoric on the far right with Trump and others, and then you talk about it factually. Like, look at what Trump is saying. Look at the way he's talking about immigrants coming over the border. They're criminals. They're from lunatic and insane asylums. And then you call them out on that. They say, "Oh no, you're the real fascist. You're the real racist." They've got no argument, so they just have to put. It's like a child. You're having an argument with a child, and you'll say, "Oh well, that was very inappropriate." They'll be like, "Oh, that was inappropriate." They'll just mirror your language. They're like children. They have got no argument, so they just have to say, "Oh no, you're the real racist. By calling out racism, you're the real racist, and by calling out fascism, you're the real fascist." So by that logic, so anyone who calls out any violence, they're the violent one. It's just pathetic because they have no arguments. It's not based in empirics. It's not based in any like real evidence. So they just have to flip reality upside down for the arguments to work. That's the only way they do it. It's like, don't look at reality, and then you can believe in what they believe.
Ruth, if members of his own party did condemn this kind of speech from Donald Trump, would it make a difference? What has history shown us?
There's this concept of authoritarian bargains where a party or elites, that could be religious elites, business elites, they sign on to protect the leader, and their job becomes to protect and support the leader. And it's very rare once they sign on that they renege on this.
So this has happened with J.D. Vance. In the debate between Tim Walz and J.D. Vance, simply asked the question, did Donald Trump win the last election? And he couldn't answer it because he knows he can't go against what Donald Trump says. He has to toe the line. And this is, J.D. Vance is the one that compared in his book years ago, I think it was his book, Donald Trump to Nazi. He's like a drug. He's like a heroin. He is like Hitler because he's got that populist language, nationalist, scapegoating, us versus them logic where it's the outsiders, it's the immigrants, it's the leftists, it's the liberal mainstream media that are the problem, not people who are like him, who want to, he literally wants people who will just do what he says. He said, like Hitler, people who don't question, because no one questioned Hitler. How you got up in the ranks under Hitler was just do what you're told, do what he says, and that's how you get up to power. And that's what Donald Trump wants. He wants exactly the same people who just toe the line, does what he says, doesn't question him, and he says on day one, I want to be a dictator. Project 25. It's all there. It's right in front of us. But they have to deny it. They have to deny the reality because even if they just concede that, yeah, it is reminiscent of 1930s Germany, they can't. They just have to be in complete denial. They can't accept the fact that this is a guy, 34-time convicted felon, found liable for sexual abuse. He's had many allegations against him. He went to Epstein's Island numerous times. You just got to ask him, why were you at Epstein's Island? What were you doing there? But I know why they won't ask him that because Bill Clinton was there. So they can't even say that because their own side is implicated in it. So you can't even have that debate. But that's where we are.
And so you don't see much criticism. It's easier to blame the press or blame the political opposition. And so once they sign on, they find themselves having to be the party of more and more violence and more repression. And many of them realize only too late what they've gotten themselves into.
That is Ruth Ben-Keene.
And that's the problem now, is that because Although I don't think the recent rally and the racist comments, the jokes, because Donald Trump has distanced himself from this guy. Although obviously he was the one who hired, he knows this guy's jokes were vetted. They knew he was there. They knew what he was saying. But Donald Trump, even like this is someone who often doesn't apologize for anything. Even Donald Trump has had to distance himself from these jokes, these obviously racist jokes. Because why would he distance himself otherwise? Even Donald Trump is conceding these jokes were hateful, they were racist. So he has to distance himself and say, oh, I don't even know who this guy is. Don't even know. Which is obviously a lie because he was there. These things are, structured. They're vetted in case he said anything libelous. These things have checks. So that could potentially impact him a little bit. I don't think it will much because I don't think his fans care. Famously, he said he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and people would still support him. His support is based on a cult, like just following. He can say what he wants. He can do what he wants. He can be a criminal. He can be, support insurrection. Fine. And this is the scary thing is now because it's so close. This election next week is a coin flip between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. It's going to be incredibly close. And how do you think Donald Trump is going to react if he doesn't win in November? Anything can happen. Is there going to be another January the 6th? Is there going to be another insurrection on the Capitol? That could happen. Other things can happen. I mean, we don't know. That's the point. We don't know what Donald Trump is going to encourage and how people are going to react. Because he's going to call foul. He's going to be saying it's a rigged election. He's going to make all these lies like he did last time. And it's going to be pretty terrifying. I think stuff's going to happen, let's just say. And he'll probably get away with it like he did with January the 6th. The fact that you nearly had a coup of the government, people were arrested, but there's been no real accountability for Donald Trump and for the people who instigated it. Why is this? Mystery to me. So, Trump is a fascist. There's a lot of cope on the right that he isn't, that he's just he's concerned for his country and he doesn't want criminals to come in the country. But there's criminals in the native population. On average, both in the UK and America, immigrants commit crime on the same levels as the native population. And often, crime is a socio-economic phenomena. The poorer you are, the more likely you are to commit crime. We know the data's clear on this. There's a real, not just a correlation, but a causation between crime and poverty and low socioeconomic status. So if conservatives really cared about crime and solving crime and decreasing crime, even though it has gone down on average in the last 30 years, they would fund poor areas. And that's what the left would want. We need to build infrastructure, invest in poorer areas, and so much crime would not disappear, but it would be alleviated, and people would have pride in their towns and their cities, and they'd look after it. Whereas poor people don't care about their towns and cities because they're shitholes anyway. Whereas if you put money into it and give them the chance to build their towns and cities and rebuild and have a stake in their towns and cities, because rich areas, they care about their local parks, their local libraries, the local infrastructure. They will invest in it and they will look after their own towns. They won't want to see it. And in America, specifically, property tax for education is what funds the education system. And obviously, if you live in a quite poor area where property, that impacts on the education system, where poorer areas with low property tax, not the best property, they hit double by having not very good schools. And then you have that cycle of poverty and crime. But conservatives don't talk about it. They essentialize it. And that's my big problem with conservative narratives. Because you can criticize anybody, criticize black people, Islam, anyone, Muslims, Islamic fundamentalists, but you got to look at the reason why people do things. For example, white men in the UK are more likely to be groomers of children. I don't think this is an essentialist thing. I don't think somehow white men are more just prone genetically to doing this. I think there's complicated reasons why men are more likely to do this. There's various reasons. I think, again, socio-economic, poorer men are more likely to do it than their wealthier counterparts. That's one thing. Opportunism is one. And a key one is, for example, if a woman is divorced or leaves her partner and she's got children, then if a new partner comes in, that's when it's more likely to happen. So if, for example, in more Western open societies where it's more admissible to just leave a partner and get divorced, that's where someone, again, a single parent, has a new boyfriend and he exploits the child. That's maybe one reason why in white communities, white men are more likely to do it. Because, broadly speaking, Muslim communities, probably more likely to stay in a marriage that's more dysfunctional or more likely to value marriage. Whereas we are a bit more admissible, again, to being divorced and less stigma to being a single mother, for example, as there would be in the East. And there's reasons why people do things. There's motivations. There's socio-economic. There's sociological reasons why everybody does things. Black people are more likely to commit crime. Why is that? Socio-economic reasons. It's not essential to them. And that's my problem with how the conservatives talk about immigration and crime and trans people, is that they essentialize it. Somehow trans people are degenerate. They're more likely to commit sexual crimes, whereas actually in reality, we know that they're four times more likely to be a victim of violence. 1 in 2 trans people are likely to be a victim of sexual assault in their lifetime, which is half. Some estimates make it even more, up to 66 and 69%, some reports say. So we're talking about the majority of the trans community have been victims of sexual violence here. So there's reasons why people do things, but it's very easy to essentialize people. There's the good guys and the bad guys. And you go, well, they're just bad people. Criminals, they're just bad people. They just do it because they're bad. And I'm a good person because I don't commit crime. I'm a law-abiding citizen. But what opportunities have you had in your life? You were brought up in a fairly comfortable house. You weren't wealthy, but you had caring parents, loving parents. You had an all right education. Maybe you went to university and you've got an all right job. Most people who fall into crime don't necessarily have that support network, especially a lot of men as well. A lot of men are more likely to be homeless. And if you've not got that support network or family, men are more likely to be impacted by that. And that's, again, a sociological problem. Most problems in society stem from the material world that we live in. And we need to analyze that and look at, and not just say, oh, no, Muslims are just like that. They're just criminal. There's nothing we can do. They're just like that. They've just always been like that and they always will be. No, this is deeply essentialist language where you say people are like this genetically and white people are good. White people are just better. Civilization is just more. No, it's wealth. There's a reason why wealthier countries, on average, are more progressive. Women are more likely to be more highly educated, have less children. And that's, in a way, we're kind of seeing the effects of our success. The fact that children, people have less children when the society becomes wealthy and stable. It just has a natural drop off. And we're facing that in the UK. It's a victim of success. How are you going to deal with it? Well, people aren't. Well, first of all, we need to make it affordable to have families, affordable housing. But only that will, help a certain amount. And we have an aging population. Most of the population in the UK are above 50, 60. It's like a huge swathe of the population are older. And most of the public spending, I think it's on the NHS. The top one's like NHS, and then the second is pensions. So most of the money, tax revenue, and most of the output of the government is put on pensions. We've got a massive aging population. And who's going to care for these people if people aren't having children? And this is a real problem that we're going to be facing in the coming decades, where you see people are against immigration, whereas we need these people. We need to train our own. And there is an argument we've maybe been too reliant on Labour, but we can do both. We can train our own, and we can also bring people in, because 150,000 shortfall of carers. Who's going to do that job? It's not a glamorous job. It doesn't pay well. Who's going to do it? Unless you incentivize people to do it, pay well, make the conditions good, make sure people are looked after and they've got the training and the ability to do the job well, the funding. But that takes money and it takes tax. And we see in the budget that Rachel Reeves has done an okay budget. I don't think it goes as far as it should, but we're going to have to raise the money somehow to stop rebuilding the infrastructure, because the last 14 years we've seen decline. Austerity killed literally tens of thousands of people, but we don't talk about that. We talk about Muslims and trans people. We need to talk about actually who's causing the most harm. And often it's governments. The people who are in power often have the power. They're more likely to create the most harm in society. And we've seen that in the last 14 years of a Tory government, where austerity has literally given us a crumbling infrastructure, schools falling down, NHS that's just on its knees. You've got doctors and nurses worked to the bone. Part of that is Brexit. Part of the economy is, slumped since Brexit. We have lost out there, objectively, since Brexit. And especially in terms of Labour as well. A lot of people have left. Believe it or not, when you tell people to leave your country, they leave. So we've got Labour now who are trying to... it's an impossible situation for Labour. I'm no fan of Starmer, but I think what they're doing, the budget's been pretty good. Cancelling non-dom status. You've got increase in capital gains tax. You've got actually spending on education, the NHS. They are doing quite a few things, and it's hopefully just the start. But they need to raise that revenue and invest in the infrastructure, because it's been literally neglected for 14 years. So it's going to take time. And if they don't improve people's living standards in the next 5 years, which is going to be hard, there's going to be real struggle to actually make people's lives look better. Especially when you've got this constant news cycle on the right of just constant immigration bashing, constant constant culture war nonsense that doesn't relate to most people's lives. Like, most people, trans people make up such a small proportion of the population. Why is it such a big issue for the right? Because they have no policies. They don't really have any beliefs. They don't believe in anything except scapegoating immigrants, scapegoating the lefty wokey cokies, blaming the left for all the problems, blaming immigrants for all the problems, where they've never taken accountability, responsibilities for the last 14 years of government. What did they achieve? How did they make people's lives better? Apart from the wealthy, obviously the wealthy have done pretty good under the Tories, especially in the last 4 years since COVID. The wealthy have literally doubled their wealth, so they're doing fine. But the average person on the street is not. Cost of living crisis, NHS, education, university fees, housing. Oh, I've got one of my fans in. There's so many problems, but they've got no beliefs. They've got no policies. Donald Trump has no policies. What's his policy? Even when and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden came up with an immigration bill, which was actually quite right-leaning. It wasn't a leftist policy. It was quite, autocratic in many ways. But Donald Trump shot it down because that's all he has. That's literally all he has. What else would he talk about apart from immigration? Nothing. He wouldn't talk about education, Medicare for all. The slew of things he could be talking about. He doesn't care. And that's fascism in a kind of encapsulated. It's us versus their mentality, opposition, make the trans, the immigrants seem like the enemy, the leftists, the communists, they're the enemy. Whereas, somehow Donald Trump is man of the people, a billionaire. I don't know what re-preparations are. Sorry. Commenter there. He doesn't care. Neither Nigel Farage doesn't care about the working man. He's got his money. He's got his millions. He's a millionaire. He's going to do... I mean, he's looking very tired as well, isn't he? Nigel Farage. He's looking very exhausted. I think he's having trouble at the moment with the realities of being in politics. Now he's facing scrutiny and... now he's facing scrutiny. He actually has to be accountable for his words. And that's going to really undermine his efforts because he's already losing support. Because he's ever the pragmatist. That doesn't mean he's good, but he is pragmatic. He will know that he has to talk in very considered ways and be very aware of his language. And he knows he can't associate with Tommy Robinson. He can't be seen to be associated with figures like him. And a lot of Reform supporters are big Tommy fans. They see him as this working class hero who's telling the truth about immigration and these groomers. He's not. He's a liar. He's in it for himself. He is a grifter. He's found a little community where, because Tommy Robinson's in a unique space where he will never come into power. He will never really have accountability. So he can just have these GoFundMes. He can fleece money from his supporters for his legal fees and going over to Cyprus. And he can just live the life. And when he comes out to prison in 9 months or so, maybe he goes back in again for the summer riots, I hope so. He'll just live his life. He'll just, he'll have his designer clothes, his designer coats. And he will be funded by his naive supporters. And I do have genuine sympathy for the people who are victims of these demagogues, who are tricked by Farage and Donald Trump, who, have real concerns about the economy, living standards, the world, how unequal the world is. But they're just completely redirecting it towards people who are not your enemy. Most the immigrants who come over to the UK are working class people, just normal people. Probably your neighbours, people you know. But for the racist, because it's so irrational, they will know oh yeah, Mike down the street, he's one of the good blacks. Or, yeah, he's all right, he's Muslim, but, he's a sound guy, he works at, Machippy, he's all right, him. Because it's irrational. It's completely irrational. So sometimes they will lie about having a black friend or a Muslim friend or a gay friend. But often they don't. And when they do, they genuinely think that they're one of the good ones. That, nah, they're not all like that. And it's cognitive dissonance because the more exposure you have to diversity, difference of culture, ethnicity, religion, and you see that Basically, people are the same. And that brings it back around to comedy. Comedy is about that. It's about a shared experience. We're all idiots. We're all fools. We've all fallen over on ice. We all do silly things. And it's that vulnerability, the flaws that make us human. That's why stories are so powerful, because everybody sees that, oh, we're too, often our strengths are our weaknesses are our strengths, and we're all idiots. But fascism doesn't allow for that. It wants strong men. It wants a veneer of respectability. And is Donald Trump a respectable man? No, and he gets away with it. He can do anything. He can say anything and get away with it. Because for him, there's a conspiracy against Donald Trump. Like, the courts are against him, the media's against him, everyone's against him. It's that victim mentality they're always on the defense. Fascism is always on the defense. It's always like, oh, they're coming for us. The Jews are coming for us. The transes are coming for us. The immigrants are coming for us. And that's how they play it. And that's how they kind of get away with it in a way, because it's very easy to just play the victim and be like, look, we're defending ourselves. The white race are just simply defending themselves. That's all we're doing. No, nobody buys it. I mean, people do, but they shouldn't. So that's all I have for you today. My first live stream, and hopefully the first of many. I'm going to do at least one a week. Hit the likes button, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.